Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. "And what is the use of a book," thought Alice, "without pictures or conversations?" Suddenly, a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be too late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket, Alice started to her feet. She ran across the fields after it and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment down went Alice after it. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. Either the well was very deep or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time to look about her. She looked at the sides of the well and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to the end? She felt that she was dozing off and had just begun to dream, when suddenly, thump, thump, down she came upon a heap of sticks and dry leaves. Before her was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still inside, hurrying down it. She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall. Suddenly she came upon a little three-legged table. She found a little bottle on it with the words "Drink me" printed on it. Alice went through it to taste it, and finding it very nice, she very soon finished it off. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high. Soon her eye fell on a little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it and found in it a very small cake, on which the words "Eat me" were marked in curtains. So she set to work and very soon finished off the cake. "Closer and closer," cried Alice. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was." Just at that moment her head struck against the roof. In fact, she was now more than 9 feet high. Poor Alice! She sat down and began to cry. "You ought to be ashamed yourself," said Alice. "A great girl like you to go on crying like this." But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all round her. After a time she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance. It was the white rabbit returning with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit dropped the white kid gloves and the fan and scurried away into the darkness. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. She looked down at her hands and was surprised to see that she had put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done this? She thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and found that she was now about 2 feet high. The cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she dropped it hastily. That was a narrow escape, said Alice. As to say these words, her foot slipped. Another moment she was up to her chin in salt water. The pool of tears that she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam about. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. Alice went on and swam, to be sure. Poor Alice felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she heard a little pattering of footsteps in the distance. It was the white rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as if it had lost something. She heard it muttering to itself, "The Duchess! The Duchess! She will get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them?" Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and a pair of white kid gloves. They were nowhere to be seen. Soon the rabbit noticed Alice and called out to her, "Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan." And Alice was so frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed to. She came upon a neat little house, on which was a bright brass plate with the name Wee Rabbit, with a table in the window, and on it a fan and tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and gloves and was just going to leave the room, when her eye fell upon a little bottle. There was no label this time, but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for I'm quite tired of being such a little thing." It did so indeed. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling. She hastily put down the bottle, saying, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow anyone." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. Still she went on growing, and as a last resource, put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney. After a few moments she heard a voice outside. "Fetch me my clothes this moment." Presently the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opening inward and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it, the attempt proved a failure. Alice heard the rabbit say to itself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice. And after she heard the rabbit under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass. After a minute or two, Alice heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do." "A barrowful of what?" thought Alice. The next moment, a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pips were all turning into little cakes, and the bright idea came into her head. She swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she began shrinking. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran off as hard as she could and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. Alice looked all around her at the flowers and blades of grass. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself. She scratched herself on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar quietly smoking on a long hookah. The caterpillar addressed her in languid, sleepy voice. "Oh, who are you?" Alice replied rather shyly. I hardly know, sir. I can remember things as I used to, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes. What size do you want to be? It asked. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. Very good height indeed, said the caterpillar, rearing itself upright as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. The caterpillar got down off the mushroom and crawled away, remarking as it went, "One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter." Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it, as it was perfectly round. She found this a very difficult question. She scratched her arms around it and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. "And now which is which?" she said, and nibbled a little of the right hand bit. The next moment she felt a blow underneath her chin. It had struck her foot. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot there was hardly room to open her mouth. But she did it at last and managed to swallow a morsel of the left hand bit. "My head's free at last," said Alice in a tone of delight, which changed into alarm. All she could see when she looked down was an immense length of neck that seemed to rise like a stalk out of a sea of green leaves that lay far below. As there seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about easily in any direction. A sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I am not a serpent," said Alice indignantly. "Leave me alone." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon in a sulky tone as it settled down into its nest. Alice crouched down among the trees as well as she could. She remembered that she still held the pieces of mushrooms and set to carefully nibbling first at one end, then the other until she had succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange at first, but she got used to it in a few minutes. She came upon an open place with a little house in it about 4 feet high. "Whoever lives there," thought Alice, "it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them out of their wits." So she began nibbling at the right hand, but again till she had brought herself down to 9 inches. Suddenly a footman came running out of the wood. Judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door. It was opened by another footman, with a round face and large eyes like a frog. The fish footman began by producing a letter, saying in a solemn tone, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." Then they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. When the fish footman was gone, Alice went timidly up to the door and knocked. At that moment the door opened, and a large plate came skimming out and broke to pieces against one of the trees. The door led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke. The Duchess was sitting on a stool nursing a baby. The cook was leaning over the fire, stirring a large cauldron which seemed to be full of soup. "There is currently too much pepper in that soup," said Alice. There was currently too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed occasionally, and as for the baby, it was sneezing and howling alternately without a moment's pause. The only two creatures in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and a large cat that was sitting on the hearth and grinning from ear to ear. "Please, would you tell me," said Alice a little timidly, "why your cat grins like that?" "It's a Cheshire cat," said the Duchess. "Pig!" She said the last word with such sudden violence that Alice jumped, but she saw that it was addressed to the baby. The cook took the cauldron of soup off the fire and at once set to work throwing everything within the reach at the Duchess and the baby. "Oh, please, mind what you are doing," cried Alice. "Here, you may nurse it a bit if you like," the Duchess said to Alice, flinging the baby at her as she spoke. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." And she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her as she went, but it just missed. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty, as it was a queer-shaped little creature. The poor thing was snorting like a steam engine and kept doubling itself up, straightening itself out again. So she carried it out into the open air. The little thing groaned, and Alice looked very anxiously into its face. It had a very turned-up nose, much more like a snout than a real nose. Also, its eyes were getting extremely small for a baby. The thing sobbed again, or grunted. It was impossible to say which. This time there could be no mistake about it. It was a pig. So she set the little creature down and felt quite relieved to see it trot away quickly into the woods. It would have made a dreadfully ugly child, she was just saying to herself when she was little startled by seeing the Cheshire cat sitting on a bough of a tree. The cat only grunted when it saw Alice. "Cheshire puss," she began rather timidly. "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to," said the cat. "In that direction lives a hatter, and in that direction lives a March hare. Do you play croquet with the Queen today?" "I should like it very much," said Alice, "but I haven't been invited yet." "You'll see me there," said the cat, and it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the tail and ending with the green, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. "Well, I've often seen a cat without a green," thought Alice, "but a green without a cat." She had not gone much farther before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. There was a table set out under a tree in the front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep. "No room! No room!" they cried when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it earnestly and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and said, "The 4th." "2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. "What a funny watch," she remarked. "It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is." Said the Hatter, "1:30, time for dinner." "I only wish it was," the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. "We quarreled at last March," replied the Hatter, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. "It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. Up above the world you fly, like a tree in the sky." "Well, I hardly finished the first verse," said the Hatter, when the Queen bawled out, "He's murdering the time off with his head." "How dreadfully savage!" exclaimed Alice. "Suppose we change the subject," the March Hare interpreted. "Really, now you ask me," said Alice. "I don't think—" "Then you shouldn't talk," said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in disgust and walked off. Neither of the others took the least notice of her going. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the dormouse into the teapot. "I will never go there again," said Alice as she picked her way through the wood. "It's the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life." Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. "That's very curious," she thought, "but everything's curious today," and it she went. She found herself in a beautiful garden among bright flower beds and cool fountains. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, and just as she came up, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, 5, don't go splashing paint over me like that." "Would you tell me, please," said Alice, "why you are painting those roses?" 2 began in a low voice. "Why, you see, miss, this her ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake, and if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our hats cut off." At the moment, 5 called it out, "The Queen! The Queen!" And the 3 gardeners threw themselves flat upon their faces. First came 10 soldiers, all shaped like the 3 gardeners. Next, the 10 courtiers. After these came the royal children, the little deers jumping merrily along hand in hand. Next came the guests, and among them Alice recognized the white rabbit. They followed the knave of the hearts and last of all came the King and Queen of Hearts. The procession came opposite Alice, and Queen said severely, "Who is this? What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please your majesty," said Alice very politely, but she added to herself, "Why, they are only a pack of cards. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen. "Nonsense," said Alice, and the Queen was silent. The King laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she's only a child." "I see," said the Queen. "Can you play croquet?" "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on then, get to your places," shouted the Queen. People began running about in all directions, stumbling up against each other. However, they got settled down in a minute and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in her life. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs and the mollusks live flamingos. The soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. Alice was beginning to feel uneasy. She was looking for some way of escape and wondering whether she could get away without being seen, when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. She made it out to be a grin and said to herself, "It's such a sarcasm. Now I shall have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat as soon as there was mouth enough for it to speak with. In another moment the wolf had appeared and Alice began an account of the game, feeling very glad she had someone to listen to her. "I don't think they play at all fairly," Alice began, "and they all quarrel so dreadfully. One can't hear oneself speak." The cats had begun fading and disappeared entirely. "Let's go on with the game," the Queen said, and Alice slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. All the time they were playing, the Queen never left off quarreling with the other players and shouting, "Off with his head!" or "Off with her head!" Those whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers. By the end of half an hour, all the players except the King, the Queen, and Alice were under sentence of execution. Then the Queen, quite out of breath, said to Alice, "Have you seen a mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a mock turtle is." "It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the Queen. "Come on, then, and he shall tell you his story." As they walked off together, Alice heard the King say in a loud voice to the company generally, "You are all pardoned." "Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself. They very soon came upon a griffon lying fast asleep in the sun. "Up, lazy thing," said the Queen, "and take this young lady to see the mock turtle. I must go back and see after some executions I ordered." The griffon sat up and rubbed its eyes. "It's all her fancy that they never accuse nobody, you know. Come on." They had not gone far before they saw the mock turtle sitting, sad and lonely, on a ledge of rock. Alice pitied him deeply. "This young lady," said the griffon, "wants to know your history." "I will tell it," said the mock turtle in a deep hollow tone. "Once I was a real turtle. When we were little, we went to school in the sea. I've been to a day school too," said Alice. "We learned French and music. How many hours a day did you do lessons?" 10 hours the first day," said the mock turtle. 9 the next, and so on. "That's the reason they're called lessons," the griffon remarked, "because they lesson from day to day." The mock turtle sighed deeply. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute sobs choked his voice. "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "So you have no idea what a lobster cradle is?" "No, indeed," said Alice. "What sort of a dance is it?" "Would you like to see a little of it?" said the Mock Turtle. "Very much indeed," said Alice. They began solemnly dancing round and round Alice, every now and then treading on her toes when they passed too close, and waving their forepaws. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began to sing, in a voice sometimes choked with sobs, when a cry of "The trial's beginning" was heard in a distance. "Come on," cried the Griffon, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off. "What trial is it?" Alice panted as she ran, but the Griffon only ran faster. The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne with a great crowd assembled around them. The Knave was standing before them in chains, and near the King was the White Rabbit with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll in the other. In the middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. It made Alice quite hungry to look at them. "I wish they'd get the trial done," she thought, and hand round the refreshments. "Harold, read the accusation," said the King. The White Rabbit blew on the trumpet and unrolled the scroll and read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict," the King said to the jury. Not yet, not yet," the rabbit hastily interrupted. "There's a good deal more to come before that." "Call the first witness," said the King. The first witness was the Hatter. "Take off your hat," the King said. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen," the King exclaimed. "Give your evidence and don't be nervous, or I will have you executed on the spot." Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation. She was beginning to grow larger again. The miserable Hatter went down on one knee. "I am a poor man, your Majesty," he began. "You are a very poor speaker," said the King. "If that's all you know about it, you may go and take his hat off outside," the Queen added to one of the officers, but the Hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. "Call the next witness," said the King. Alice watched the White Rabbit, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name Alice. "Here," cried Alice, forgetting how large she had grown in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box, upsetting all the jurymen. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed, and began picking them up as quickly as she could. The King called out, "Silence!" and read out from this book, "Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the court." Everybody looked at Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the King. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the Queen. "Why, they are," said the King truthfully, pointing to the tarts on the table. "Nothing can be clearer than that. Let the jury consider their verdict." "No, no," said the Queen. "Sentence first, verdict afterward." "Nonsense," said Alice loudly. "Hold your tongue," said the Queen, turning purple. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head!" The Queen shouted. Nobody moved. "Who cares for you?" said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. "You are nothing but a pack of cards." At this the whole speck rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. She gave a little scream and tried to beat them off, and found herself lying with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some leaves that had fluttered down upon her face. "Wake up, Alice dear," said her sister. "Why, what a long sleep you have had." "Oh, I've had such a curious dream," said Alice, and she told her sister all these strange adventures. When she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, "It was a curious dream, dear, but now it is getting late." So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran what a wonderful dream it had been.